Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted on Tuesdays in the off-season and twice during the regular season. Huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We first start off with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC football news. Let's first meet Tuesday's panelists, a WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways. In addition to regular season football and basketball reports, he also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC. That's Marc Kulkin. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, Erik McKinney. A former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge, now has his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge, solo edition. He's a graduate of the USC Law School, Chris Arledge. And finally, a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays, The Obvious and Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America. Your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, that's me, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's a recap of USC football news. The 2023 USC Trojans will open training camp on Howard Jones, Bryant Kennedy Fields this Friday morning at 6:30 a.m. in preparation for their season opener against the San Jose State Spartans on Saturday, August 26th in Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Trojans are scheduled for 18 training camp days running from July 28th through August 18th. And then afterwards, the Trojans will initiate their regular season practice schedule. A reminder that training camp and in-season practices are closed to the general public, and not all practices will be open to the media. Last week, the Trojans were close, but no recruiting cigars, as three major USC recruits made their commitments public. Five-star Georgia receiver Mike Matthews committed to Tennessee. Texas running back Taylor Tatum announced for Oklahoma, and on Sunday, four-star linebacker Kingston Vialamu Asa announced for Notre Dame. However, it should be noted that these oral commitments are nothing until they're officially signed of letter of intent day, which would start in December. And speaking of recruiting, a reminder that the recruiting division of WeAreSC.com, headed by Scott Schrader, assisted by Marshall Levinson, can be read daily during the week for our premium subscribers. And don't forget to watch the Friday WeAreSC.com video recruiting roundup show with Scott Schrader and host Dylan Brazier. Friends, WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership, and we strongly encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click on the like and red subscriber buttons. It's greatly valued, appreciated, and it's free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering an all WeAreSC premium content for $9.99 monthly, or for $99.99, a full year subscription. You won't want to miss the site that really does tell it like it is, shoot straight with USC and college football fans. So with that, let's get this thing kicked off. Panel, in last week's Inside the Trojans Huddle, we went over the pre-training camp analysis of the offensive units and special teams. This week, first half of the huddle concentrates on the preseason 2023 pre-training camp Trojans defense as we head into Friday morning's opening of training camp. So, panel, let's start the first half with a general overall defensive question. Already armed with arguably the nation's most explosive offense and the nation's most outstanding offensive player, in order for the Trojans to win the Pac-12 conference and be a serious college football playoff postseason contender, I'm asking you these four questions or evaluations. The 2023 USC defense must be A, slightly improved from 2022, B, modestly improved from 2022, C, significantly improved from 2022, D, greatly improved from 2022. Our leadoff panelist, as always, Marc Kulkin. A, B, C, or D?
I think there's an answer that lies somewhere between B and C. Look, I don't think anybody should anticipate USC's plus minus ratio to match what they did last year. It'd be great if they can be close to it. And I suppose USC can be really good on offense, protecting the ball like they did last year. But I don't think anybody should anticipate that many turnovers from the USC defense. Now, if they're close, and again, they don't turn the ball over, USC's defense just needs to get better at the fundamentals, tackling when they meet the ball carrier and not being dragged down the field an extra 2 or 3 yards. So it doesn't have to be greatly improved. We know that they know how to create turnovers. And from what it looked like when you look at the film, they were in the right position to make the play. So again, last year, they were, you want to use the term serviceable. This year, you're hoping they're actually better than modestly and significantly improved. When you've got an offense like USC, that's all you need is significant improvement on defense. They were that close to making the playoffs last year when they were what most people like to classify as a hot mess on defense. So again, I think the answer is somewhere between B and C.
Erik McKinney, A, B, C, D, or somewhere in between. What say you?
It's all of them. I do like the way Lincoln Riley talks about individual games, right? I mean, if you wanted to say over the course of the entire season, the stats need to be a lot better. But for game to game, they only need to be, they needed to be 2 points better against Utah during the regular season. They needed to be much better against Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. The idea that USC's defense is going to face, especially at the end of the year, Washington at home, Utah at home, at Oregon, they have to go to Notre Dame, that whole slate, and you're going to hold those teams to 14 points or 17 points. I don't think that that's the case. You're going to have games that you still have to win 42-45 or 45-49, something like that. So you can get just a little bit better, I think, and win some of those games. I don't think there's any reason to sit here and say you have to give up 13 points a game or something like that, or be the number one defense in the country. Now, I do think, and we'll get to this later, I do think they are going to be a lot better just based on personnel, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I think it's a game-to-game thing, because if you look at what they did against Oregon State, right, that's a different defense than what they did in some of those other games. So I think there's kind of nuance to that conversation, talking about over the course of a season, over 12 games or 13 or 15 games or whatever you're talking about.
All right, well, Chris, you're coming from a defensive standpoint, having played cornerback in college. A, B, C, or D?
Well, if your question is how much better does the defense have to be to make them a Pac-12 title contender, the answer is they were a Pac-12 title contender last year with a defense about as bad as you'll ever see at USC. So they can contend even if the defense doesn't improve a lot. But it's going to be hard to make the playoff, and it's going to be hard to beat any of the elite teams if the defense isn't dramatically better. So I would say slight improvements enough to give them a shot to win the Pac-12. But if they want to be where Lincoln Riley expects them to be and where the fans want them to be, they're going to have to be dramatically better than last year, because last year's defense was terrible, right? I mean, the numbers, it's about moments in part, right? The inability to ever stop Utah for the last 3 quarters of both of those games, or watching Tulane of all people run up and down the field, big play after big play. It's those moments, and also the numbers. The numbers were terrible. So last year's defense was an abomination, and they should be dramatically better this year. But if you're asking me, do they have to be dramatically better to win the Pac-12? Not necessarily. I think they're going to score 50 points a game. They're going to win most of those. So, Utah and Washington, UCLA, these teams have to score 52. Will they? They might, but I wouldn't count on it. I think USC can hold those teams to 43.
Well, I looked at this question, and I have to focus on winning the Pac-12 and being a contender. If I broke it down into first 6 games versus the final 6 games. If I look at the first 6 games, I'd say, they just have to be modestly improved from 2022. And then I look at the last 6 games, and I think Pac-12 championship is on the line, and a possible college football playoff. I would think they would have to be significantly improved from 2022. So I'm kind of caught between 2 sections of the schedule, but the point of the question was, how good do they have to be? I'm going to say the offense is good enough, but I think defensively they have to be significantly improved from 2022. All right, let's now transition to analyzing each individual defensive position group's strengths, weaknesses, surprises. That would be surprises include player or system, and the unknown. Let's start with a look at the defensive line. What do you see as the defensive line strengths, weaknesses, surprises, and the unknown? Let's start off with Mark. How do you see it?
So I think the strength going in until we see them perform it's got to be the depth. I mean, you brought in Jack Sullivan, Kyan Bars, Anthony Lucas, Bear Alexander. Plus, you've got those guys returning from last year. Tyrone Taleni and Solomon Tuliaupupu started to kind of make his presence felt. And Lincoln Riley touched on that, how he's more than just a bull rusher now. So the strength is, at least on paper, you've got more depth. Now, the weakness is, at least the way I see it so far, is maybe the depth up the middle. I don't know what you have backing up, a guy like Kyan Bars. That's probably the biggest weakness. And then the surprise is, what's Sean Newa's impact going to be with Corey Foreman? Can he convert him to a hand in the dirt guy, as well as, can he take Solo and Taleni to that next level? We saw what they were capable of, but, again, without Tuliaupupu last year, I don't think many people are going to look at the defensive line as one of the team's strengths on defense. And then I guess the unknown, did USC do enough in the offseason to help that group out? And I think they did, but now we'll just have to see what they do in these once the season starts.
Okay, Erik, your perspective?
A lot of the same stuff that Mark said. I think that the strength, it's not so much depth overall, it's that they added a bunch of guys who have played at this level before and done pretty well. So I don't know if you're still talking about, you go 3 deep at every spot across the board. But the guys that you added, I know Bear Alexander and Anthony Lucas, that's a very small sample size where you're talking about those are 2022 true freshmen, but they're true freshmen that earned playing time at Georgia and Texas A&M and played well when they did that. But Kyan Bars at Arizona has played a ton. Jack Sullivan at Purdue has played a ton. So you're adding guys that have shown that they can play at this level. So there's not a ton of unknown with some of those guys that you're adding. Now, the weakness I still think is that you're rolling out a bunch of guys where you're hoping that they take the next level. You don't bring back a Tuliaupupu where you knew going in, this is going to be a guy, he's going to put up stats, you can build around him. Would I guess that way with Bear Alexander based on what we've seen? Sure. I think Anthony Lucas can do that at this level. I think some of those guys can do it, and certainly the coaches do too. But I think that's the weakness right now is, can those guys be elite? Do you have a guy that you can kind of build around and this guy's going to make a play on any given snap? The surprise, the unknown, I think one of the surprises is what USC is going to get from returning guys. There's so much attention on all those newcomers, but Mark mentioned Tyrone Taleni. I think he's a guy who could play a lot. I think Solomon Tuliaupupu, he's a guy that could play a lot. Even a guy like Stanley Tufo, like he's coming back and can fill in. I think the biggest thing that happened on this defensive line is that those guys that had been asked to play so many snaps and do so much for you, they're not going to want to take a step back, but they can't. You have enough guys now where they can take a step back and they're not being asked to take 600 snaps during the season or high 500s. They can fill in, they can catch a breath, you can rotate there. So I think those guys, for being potentially kind of counted out, oh, all these new guys are coming in, that's it, that's where it's going to be. I do think those new guys end up starting and playing a ton. But I think USC is still going to get some production from those guys coming back. And I mean, the unknown's always going to be, like Mark mentioned, Corey Foreman, does he give you anything? And I'm not prepared at this point to say, oh, this is his year. Here we go, here he comes. But when you have that sort of talent waiting and untapped, and I think Devin Tompkins is probably in there too, these young guys, where does the light switch for them? A couple of freshmen coming in there too, along that defensive line. What can you get out of, say, a young guy where all of a sudden it clicks and he can contribute? That for me is kind of always the unknown that you don't know going into a season. Those can be really pleasant surprises that give you some good snaps.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo a lot of the same things. Look, I think the strength and the weakness is the same, strangely enough. It's depth, in that there are a lot more good players on this defensive line than USC's had in a few years. I mean, with Bear Alexander, with Bars, Lucas, Sullivan, Tuliaupupu, with those 5 guys, I think there's a pretty good chance you're going to get some good play. Last year, I would have put 2 guys in that category, Tuli and Nick Figueroa, right? And then you have the other guys who I think that are promising. I do think Tolini is going to be. I think I almost added him to that group of 5. I feel pretty comfortable with. And I think, you know, is Lafitte going to be ready to be a guy who can come in and give you 10, 15 plays? Kid's got some good size. He has some athleticism. It's tough for a true freshman, but he might be able to come in and give you some time. Is Elijah Hughes going to be a guy who's ready to jump in and contribute? I don't know, but I think you have a lot more good players. Weakness is also depth. You have a lot more good players, but I don't know that you go too deep, 3 across, right? I mean, this is not, when you get to guys like Tuliaupupu and Tolini, you're talking about guys who probably wouldn't play at Georgia. And while that's a little bit unfair because Georgia is the elite program in the country right now, it's fair in that that's what USC intends to be, right? They intend to be an elite program. And I don't see that sort of depth and talent along the defensive front. But I think this group's going to be much, much improved, right? Because last year there were times when you had Tuli making plays, and then you had the other guys just getting pushed around, right? I mean, there were weeks where that's all that you saw. I don't think you're going to see that this year, right? I think Alexander, Bars, Lucas, Sullivan, I don't think those guys are going to get pushed around consistently by anybody. I think they can all play. Surprise. I guess my surprise is that Corey Foreman is listed on the defensive line and that he's still on the roster, because let's be honest, Corey Foreman's not going to beat out most of those guys we just talked about. He's not a good enough football player to play in that 2 deep, I don't think. And if he does play in that 2 deep, he's competing with Tolini to get on the field. And that's just the way it is. I've seen him play for 2 years now. I know what he has to offer. And so what I'm surprised at is that he moves to D-line where it's probably not where he intended to be. I think he intended to be an elite edge rusher when he came to USC. And now he's going there where there are a bunch of bigger bodies that are probably better football players, and he's still on the roster. I think that's a good thing. I mean, Corey's a Trojan and wants to stay a Trojan. So I think, I'll give him credit for that, but it's a little bit surprising that he hasn't tried his luck somewhere else, I think. The unknown here, I mentioned already, how soon will Elijah Hughes be ready to contribute? I'll tell you right now, that kid's a football player, and he is going to be a contributor. I don't know if it's this year, and everybody talks about, well, he's kind of undersized, maybe, but I mean, he's listed on the roster as what, 6'3", 270. Now, if that height and weight is correct, that's not that small for a defensive end at this level. So I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if that guy gets in the rotation and actually flashes from time to time, because that tape he showed last year was really off the charts good. I mean, he is quick off the line, and he's going to cause problems for people. So, but that's the big unknown. If Hughes can show, by mid-season that he's ready to jump in and actually make plays at this level against good teams, this defensive line may turn out to be a lot better than anybody thought.
Well, I'll say that I think that there is talent. And a lot of it to me is potential, unproven talent. Some of these guys, Sullivan and Bars, I think they've proven that they play. I want to see Bear Alexander play what everybody else says he's capable of doing. Now, we saw that in the national championship game. He was very dominant. Will he do it for 15 games potentially? Same thing with Anthony Lucas. So I would agree with Chris. Some of the strength is the weakness, maybe the depth, but to me, surprise would be, well, I don't even know if I call it a surprise. Tyrone Tellini, I think he can really play, probably even be more effective, as they say, coming off the bench. And I am also very intrigued with Elijah Hughes. He plays with a motor. I think he's the type of player that you look at and you just go, this guy could play. It's a question of when they feel he can actually be effective. The unknown to me is just how effective this group will be. We think we know, and we think we know maybe the first 6 games, what it's kind of going to look like. But again, we'll know those last 6 games. So with that, let's move on to the rush end unit. What do you see as the strengths, weaknesses, surprises, and the unknown? Mark, how do you see it?
So I think the strength of this group is that there's more choices that Roy Manning and Alex Grinch get to use. You brought in, an infusion of experience, but you also, I think it's the youth is going to really maybe take over this position group. Sam Green, he flashed during the spring. He caught everybody's attention. And then you've got Braylon Shelby and DJ Peavy that are ready to start fall camp. And they're a lot bigger than I think what USC had on the roster last year. Can Romello Height, again, you've got the experience with Romello Height, but is he going to be able to stay healthy? Solomon Byrd is back for another year in the system. The weakness is pretty much the position group itself. It hasn't done anything unless Tuli Tuipulotu is lined up out there. So in year 2, is the position group not going to be a weakness? Because it's a pretty integral part of the scheme. And then I think my surprise, again, a freshman's going to take over that starter role by the end of the season, whether it's Sam Green or whether it's Shelby or Peavy. I think one of those 3 eventually will take over, and obviously I'm leaning towards Sam Green. So that's really the unknown is who is going to take that spot and say it's mine.
All right, Erik McKinney.
Yeah, I mean, the strength is that Roy Manning gets to work with more than one guy at a practice. I mean, there were times last year where it seemed like he was just having a series of one-on-one meetings throughout the season with kind of who was available out there. There are a ton of guys. Anthony Lucas isn't listed out there, but he started the spring game at rush end. You brought in Jamil Muhammad, and then you've got 3 true freshmen that are very talented and could play there. Solomon Bird's a guy that could play there. Solomon Tulipupu, if he had to move out there, he could work at both defensive end and rush end. So you could have 6 scholarship guys, 7 scholarship guys kind of working out there, depending on how you do that. And that's just not what we saw last year. It was kind of whoever's available, go ahead and take some game snaps at that position. And the weakness is, we haven't seen anybody who's listed on this team as a rush end truly have any success there. So it's the weakness is the unknown, right? Can they actually do something at this position? For me, it seems like you've got enough talent there. You've got enough guys that will have worked. Sam Green was here in the spring. Anthony Lucas obviously worked there in the spring. Jamil Muhammad worked there in the spring. So you have enough what seems like talent who isn't just showing up right now for fall camp and, hey, we need you in 3 weeks. that if you can't get something out of this position, get rid of the position. I mean, it's everything feels like it's there right now. You recruited it hard with all the guys that you've brought in to seemingly play that spot. So again, that's the weakness right now, is that you wouldn't bet based on last year on this is going to be a hugely impactful position. And yet all the coaches on that side of the ball talk about, we need this to be a hugely impactful position. So it's time for that to get going based on who's out there. Yeah. The surprise, Sam Green was the surprise, I think, of spring. And he showed, I mean, we talked about Elijah Hughes, right? Is he undersized? And that was really the thought about all of USC's defensive line additions as in this true freshman class, where they're not the high 4-star, 5-star guys. And the thought about all of them was, oh, it's because the size there. But Sam Green goes out and plays rush end and looks every bit like a 4th-year player with his size out there. That guy is thick and he can move. That's a big addition out there. Braylon Shelby too, another true freshman. And I think Jamil Muhammad gets kind of talked over a little bit in that spot, but he clearly came to USC to make an impact and play that spot. So I think there could be maybe a few surprises out there. And then I know I kind of took the unknown talking about the weakness too, but does Anthony Lucas stay out there? Is he your 4th guy on that line? Does he move over and play defensive end and someone else is at rush end? I think it was maybe a little surprising that he started there and that's all he played in the spring game. Is that we want to see that on film and maybe we won't do that in the fall, or is that, no, that's his spot and that's where we're going to go with that. So where does Anthony Lucas, I think, line up for me is my biggest question about that rush end spot. Well, and can you get 10 sacks out of it, or whatever that goal number has to be for that spot.
Mr. Arledge.
Yeah, the strength, I think, to me, is future upside. We talked about the new guys, Sam Green, Braylon Shelby, DJ PV. That's a pretty nice group of athletes at that spot, in the true freshman ranks. I think in a couple of years, we're going to look at this position as one where USC has a lot of production and a lot of talent. We're going to be very pleased with it in the future. The weakness is, do they have anybody who can play right now? I don't know. Muhammad and Height are athletic guys who are completely unproven. Muhammad played in a smaller conference, and while you look at him on film and he looks like he's a good athlete, his numbers certainly don't jump off the page. Height is a guy I think they were high on. He didn't stay healthy. I don't know. Solomon Byrd is probably going to provide depth, but Solomon Byrd's not a guy you're going to put on the edge and get 12 sacks from. He's not going to do that. So, I don't know if they have anybody who can play now. I feel really good about 2025. The surprise, Eric already nailed it. The surprise is how quickly Sam Green made his presence felt at that spot. I don't think we even knew Sam Green was going to play standing up. I kind of assumed he was going to be a hand in the dirt guy and he'd take a year or two to get bigger. He also, this was another guy that we all talked about as being underrated as a recruit. He also had great film and he played against some good competition and played really well, including IMG Academy, where they had a lot of trouble with him. So I'm not surprised that Sam Green is a good football player. I am surprised that I look at this unit and say, Sam Green may be the starter by game 8. I don't know that I expected that, but I think that may happen. Unknown, it's all unknowns. It's all unknowns. I just said that a true freshman who I thought was going to be an inside guy, maybe the starter in game 8. And the fact that I'm thinking that tells me that there's nothing about this unit that I feel comfortable with, other than the fact that they got to be a whole lot better. And by the way, Anthony Lucas is not a stand-up edge rusher. I don't think he is a guy who is super athletic for a down lineman. I don't know that he's not Lawrence Taylor as a stand-up outside guy, right? He's not Matthews. He's not that. I think they were trying him a rush in because the coaches went into the spring not knowing if they have a single guy out there that they can count on to stay healthy and play. And so they thought, well, Lucas is a good athlete. Let's try him. The fact that he's now listed as a defensive lineman tells me that they may feel okay about some of these other guys, including Green. And so they may be able to put Lucas where he should be, which is at a defensive end position. And that's probably where he needs to play. And it's probably going to be really good there. So that's the unknowns. It's all unknowns. There is no known at that position.
All right, I'll wrap up this section. I think that the strength is there's a lot of numbers, but that also leads into the weaknesses. What is the quality of this group? You could have 10 guys and none of them are a dominator, and I'm looking for a dominator. I think if we actually see a dominator come out, it's certainly going to make Alex Grinch look like a lot better defensive coordinator. Surprise to me is going to be Green, although I don't know how surprising it is. Look, these coaches see these guys in practice. They know who's dominating, who's doing what, and they may not have to really worry in terms of what they expect in the first half of the season. Braylon Shelby certainly is a candidate. Unknown to me, it just all gets back to who's going to be the difference maker. Somebody's going to step forward. I would suspect that it's going to be the player that has the biggest motor, the guy whose hair is on fire on all plays, ready to go. I don't think that they can. This cannot be an invisible position if they're going to be successful. Now, one factor, of course, invisible positions, I don't think is a case, is moving on to inside linebackers and that room. What do you see with that group, Marc Kulkin?
I see a lot of experience. Look, I don't think anybody's going to argue that Eric Gentry, Mason Cobb, Rajon Davis, and Shane Lee are going to be the anticipated 2 deep. And you're talking about what? Juniors and seniors. So behind them, you've got, Chris Thompson Jr., Tackett Curtis, Garrison Madden. They're going to push for playing time. So you got a lot of experience coming back. That is the strength of the group right now. And the fact that they only play 2 linebackers at a time on the field inside. The weakness is, and it probably goes along with the Russian position, it's going to be the depth and the durability. Last year, the staff showed that they had trust issues when certain guys went down. It took till the last game of the year against Tulane for Rajon Davis to open up this, the coaching staff's eyes that, hey, he's capable of doing something if you give him the chance. So again, as long as those main 4 guys of Gentry and Cobb and Davis and Lee can stay on the field, I don't think there's going to be any weakness at the linebacker position this year, at least inside. For me, and I think for everybody, the surprise is going to see Shane Lee play better than last year. Can he fit into this scheme and play with 2 hands rather than 1 for most of the season? And then the unknown is, can the group just be more physical, and especially against the run? Because if they're not, then going back to that first question that we were asked, how good does the defense have to be? Well, if the defense period up and down isn't more physical, it's going to be a long season, and the offense is going to have to score a lot of points.
Eric?
Yeah, again, kind of same boat. There wasn't anything in there that I'm, no, that's absolutely wrong. The strength, I think, is that you've got 3 experienced veteran guys now in that group. And I think once you add in some of those guys behind it, yeah, I think the coaches feel much better about what that 2 deep, 3 deep potentially looks like there. I mean, that was a position where last year those top 2 guys got hurt and the coaches found any way to not put any linebackers on the field. They would have put 8 defensive backs on the field, I think, if they could have. That's kind of what it felt like they trusted that group. So I think that's a strength where you look at kind of the number of guys that the coaches will feel comfortable playing this year. The weakness is I don't know right now that any of those guys has proven that they can do absolutely everything that you want your inside linebacker to do. Shane Lee kind of, and again, yes, he had that hand, wrist, thumb, whatever that was. And you saw sort of the cast, and it's like, I don't know how he's going to get on the field, let alone try to grab somebody with this and tackle them. And then Eric Gentry got hurt too, but that was sort of right? Eric Gentry brings a ton of athleticism, but can he fill a hole and be that physical punishing linebacker? Can Shane Lee be that athletic guy that you have to be now as an inside linebacker here? Mason Cobb's a guy that I think has shown he can do some of that stuff, but I don't know if you have a group where you're talking, I mean, again, it's USC. So we're talking about, can you put out one of the 3, 4, 5 best units at any position in the country? This isn't just like, can you tread water and get through the Pac-12? I think we all agree, like when we talk about position groups, that's where at USC you should be comparing yourself to. So I think that maybe if you're picking a weakness here, I think it's that you don't walk into the season with like, this is an All-American guy that we can build a defensive around. Now, I say that to go into the surprise. I think Mason Cobb ends up coming in and playing even better than people expect him to. I am going to start the season pretty high on Mason Cobb based on what I've seen, what you hear from players, from coaches, the way he talks about kind of his fit, his role, all of that. And then the unknown for me is how quickly, and I think there's two, Rajon Davis, but especially Tackett Curtis. How quickly can Tackett Curtis show the coaches that he's trustworthy enough to be able to go out there and play? Because there's a handful of recruits every year where you get a real sense from the coaches, like, hey, we want to play this guy. We want to get this guy on the field. They just have to tick all the boxes of, yeah, we know that he's going to cover the right guy. He's not going to make some impulsive, insane decision. All of that stuff is buttoned up. So how quickly does that happen for Tackett Curtis? And does he make an impact early on? It's kind of interesting. That's the way that schedule sets up, because typically you'd sort of ease freshmen in, and then, you know, there's a game or two at the end where they can play. And it's like, all right, here's your 2 games, here's your 3 games that get in. Those games at the end are going to mean a ton. So if you're not ready to go, I don't know if you can just get your 2 games or 3 games. So they're going to have to prove it pretty quickly, because there's not a lot of wiggle room for mistakes there at the end.
Chris?
Yeah, I think the strength is athleticism. Mason Cobb, Tackett Curtis, Eric Gentry, Rajon Davis, these guys are all really good athletes. Garrison Madden, by the way, is a really good athlete. He runs like a corner. I don't know if he's going to be ready to play this year, especially with the guys he has in front of him. But you have a lot of good athletes, which is important. There have been times in the last couple of years where USC's linebackers just looked like they weren't athletic enough to play the position. In fact, USC defensively has at times in the last few years looked like they weren't athletic enough to compete. This is a group of good athletes. Weakness. I think you have 2 proven guys, one of whom is, at least looks like he's way too thin to be a linebacker, and he didn't hold up physically last year. That may be a little bit unfair, because even guys who are 260 can hurt their ankle. But I think you've got 2 proven guys. I feel really good if Mason Cobb and Eric Gentry are healthy. I think you have 2 guys who are going to make plays. And it's strange to me, so many USC fans seem to be down on Eric Gentry. Eric Gentry was hurt at the end of the year. That's a problem. Eric Gentry was also arguably the best player on that defense for the first half of the season, maybe the first 2/3 of the season. That guy's a problem. I know he looks weird out there because he looks like he's a small forward. It's weird. I get it. The guy makes plays, and not just in the passing game, although in the passing game, he's fantastic. He's a good football player. What he needed was time to develop physically. It sounds like he's done some of that over the offseason. If he's healthy, he's going to be a starter, and Mason Cobb is going to be a starter, and those 2 guys are going to be really good. Surprise, Lincoln Riley's statement about this being one of the best rooms on the team. I mean, they do have a lot of good players there, but that really jumped out at me. Like, Lincoln Riley is really bullish on this group. And USC hasn't been great at linebacker in years. And Lincoln Riley's looked at these guys saying, that's a really deep and a really good room. That's promising. That makes me feel good about things. Unknown, Rajon Davis. I'll quibble with Mark a little bit here. He said his perspective is that it's almost certain that Davis is in the top 4. I don't think that's close to certain. I think Tackett Curtis is going to play more than Rajon Davis this year for 2 reasons. One is Tackett Curtis. He is a little bit old for a true freshman, and he is physically developed for a true freshman. This guy is big and strong. You do not have to wait for him to get big enough to play. He's an athlete with a motor. I think he's going to come in and play a lot right away. And you have 6 games to get Tackett Curtis ready to play against the elite teams on the schedule. Same as Sam Green, right? The first 6 games, you got to get these guys ready to step in and play a huge role. And the second reason is because of what we've seen from Rajon Davis over the last couple of years. I want him as badly as anybody to figure it out and make a difference. But you've had 2 different coaching staffs look at Rajon Davis and say, we can't trust you to play, despite the fact that a lot of times the guys who were on the field were not making plays. That's just a huge red flag for me. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's something, I don't know if it's practice performance. I don't know if it's knowledge of the playbook. I have no idea. And I'm not going to speculate other than to say that when 2 different coaching staffs don't put you on the field, despite the fact that in a lot of those games, the linebackers were not cutting it, that worries me a great deal. And so I am not yet sold that we can count on Rajon Davis. I hope we can, because if Davis is ready to step up and play at a very high level, then I think that's going to give USC at least 4 guys for those 2 positions. And that means you can even afford an injury or 2 and still be all right. But for now, that's I think a huge unknown for this spot.
Okay, I'll say the strength is inside with Mason Cobb and Eric Gentry. I think that people are fascinated on how much weight Eric Gentry has. I know I looked 2 different sources in terms of written sources, roster numbers, and there's, I think, the picture in the new media guide has him at 205. And then I looked at the roster and it said 215. And then I looked at another story, it said 225. I guess that's the big question, whether he can hold up, but I think it's a good foundation. Excuse me, the weaknesses, I don't know which one of these guys is the complete package. Well-rounded, the ability to cover, to stuff the run and drop back on the pass. I sense that Cobb is a real run stopper, a real physical guy. He must be really something, because they made him as the defensive representative in Pac-12 Media Day. So I think that's kind of a really good sign. But I don't know about pass coverage, especially the Pac-12 is insane with these quarterbacks, okay? And they're really going to hit in that second half of the season. It's going to be like a parade of potential NFL draft picks. The surprise to me would be Rajon Davis Jr. Is he the guy that we saw against Tulane? Is this a question of motivation that when he got all fired up because he got to play, which was a nice thing, but you also got to bring it in practice. I'm not there at practice. Nobody's there at practice to see the meat of practice, to see what he does and his motor. But this, I will say, I think Tackett Curtis is the second coming of Brian Cushing. I think this guy has got it all. He's a football. If he was basketball, you'd say he's a gym rat. And that's a big sign. I think this guy is going to be physically ready to go. The unknown to me is whether this group can stop the run, whether they can tackle, because that's going to be really important. Of course, that is assuming that the defensive line can do their part, so these guys don't have to do all of it. All right, all of it transitions into the cornerback room. What do you see on the strengths, weaknesses, surprises, and the unknown for the cornerbacks, and this is kind of interesting when we talk about cornerbacks. SC kind of talks in terms of secondary. We want to break it down a little bit further as terms of cornerbacks and safety. So, Mark, start us off there about the cornerback room. What do you see?
Well, I'm going to actually start with the surprise because of the way that the who is listed at cornerback and who's listed as a defensive back. And I know Erik will clarify this, but when you look at the official USC roster, they've got 3 designations: cornerback, defensive back, and safety. So one of the surprises I found was Malachi Crawford was listed at cornerback. Sierra Wright wasn't. So it's just, I don't know. And I'm sure it's a matter of semantics, or maybe whoever was doing the data input just didn't know where to slot these guys. But there's a lot of depth and there's a lot of versatility. You've got Damani Jackson coming back, who was considered the #1 cornerback recruit in his class. He's now, supposedly close to 100% healthy from his ACL injury. You've got Jacoby Covington, coming back as well. So those are 2 big, long, physical cornerbacks. And I think you like that, especially when you have all the different styles of receivers. You've got guys who can run with the fast guys, but you have guys who are strong enough to go up against big, stronger NFL type of receivers that Washington might present against you. The unknown is going to be, what's the rotation? Who's matching up with who? You got, again, Erik could probably clarify this as he takes over this. You just got a bunch of guys in that room, and who you thought is going to be playing cornerback might be playing nickel, and who you might thought being playing nickel might be playing safety. I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of talent within the secondary group. Cornerback, they list 4 guys? 7 cornerbacks, 7 DBs, and 5 safeties. So you got a total of 19 guys to choose and pick where they're playing.
Erik, help us out here. How do you see it?
Yeah, I'm not going to get caught up in who's the corner and who's the DB until we see someone playing something weird during fall camp or lining up somewhere else. Right now, I think that corner spot is pretty safely looked at as 4 guys at the top of the depth chart, all kind of battling there. Damani Jackson and Sierra Wright were the 2 starters at the spring game, and then Jacoby Covington, who took over as the starter at the end of the 2022 season. And all we've heard all offseason is how good he's looked kind of throughout the offseason. And then Christian Roland-Wallace, who comes over from Arizona as the transfer and is the obvious comparison to Mekhi Blackmon, who came over from Colorado. I don't think they're that similar in terms of kind of playing style and that sort of thing. But again, when you bring in a veteran corner from the conference, from the South, that's obviously going to be the comparison, and people are going to want him to make that same kind of impact that Mekhi Blackmon did. So I think the strength is, again, you've got 4 what look to be really talented guys to be able to play corner. It's a lot like those other positions, though. Christian Roland-Wallace played a ton at Arizona and has 2 career interceptions. Jacoby Covington, his first sort of real playing time was last year, and he played in every game, but again, finishes with, I think it's 18 tackles. Sierra Wright, the experience he has was that he started last season as the starter and then got kind of passed up as Jacoby Covington. Damani Jackson, that injury sort of derailed everything last year. So nobody really brings what Mekhi Blackmon brought when he showed up from Colorado, and what you started hearing about him right away during spring ball. This guy's making plays all the time and is going to be a hugely impactful player. There was talk from Lincoln Riley. He talks a lot about what Sierra Wright did over the offseason, what Jacoby Covington did over the offseason. So again, the thought is these guys who are going to be asked to play are trending up. But again, this is not something where you look at who's probably going to take the field and go, oh, there's a ton of stuff in the history here that shows they're going to be big time impactful players. Like that rush end spot, like some of the defensive line spots, you feel okay about it, but you just don't know with this group. And I think that kind of becomes a question too. How do the coaches handle this group? Mekhi Blackmon last year, they just threw him out there at left corner and was like, you're going to take every single snap. Just stay on that sideline even when we come off, because we need you out there constantly. So is that what happens this year? Does a guy kind of separate and become locked in, you take every snap? Is there more of a rotation, which I think that's maybe the hope in a lot of different spots, where those 2s and 3s start inching their way up to the 1s. You don't want to drop down and create a rotation because everybody's a B or B plus. You want everyone to move up to that A level. So can some of those guys play well enough? And I think the surprise for me, and again, this is kind of a guess, I think Damani Jackson might be ready to go ahead and play. That last year, you could tell kind of how frustrating that fluctuation was, and seems like he's almost ready. Now there's kind of a setback. Now he goes out. You heard talk going into the Cotton Bowl, hey, this is going to be his time. He's ready to go. And clearly that didn't happen in terms of seeing the field. But you saw flashes, I think, during the spring. You're seeing kind of times and running speed and that kind of stuff this summer, to think that knee is starting to feel pretty good. I think he had a long way to go just in terms of learning that corner position. And the hope is that year, not a full year away from the field, but a bit away from the field, kind of let him learn that position and get more comfortable there. So again, it's a spot. I see it as kind of 4 guys up at the top with a bunch of questions on how that shakes out. And I think maybe you defer to Christian Roland Wallace. Again, a ton of experience. Anytime the coaching staff goes out and brings in a guy like that, they almost always end up starting. So if he's locked in at 1, that becomes a pretty big battle for that other spot.
All right, Chris, obviously you were a cornerback at the collegiate level. This is in your wheelhouse. How do you see it?
I think Erik nailed it. You should get 2 quality players out of those 4 guys at the top. You really should. I mean, and I agree that Roland Wallace is probably going to be one of the 4 for the reasons that Erik pointed out. I mean, the coaching staff knew who this guy was. He was playing in their division, and they went out and got him. He didn't come to USC to sit on the bench when he would have been a starter at Arizona. That doesn't make any sense. The weakness is that we haven't had good corner play in years. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's actually 2 years ago, I thought the corners played pretty well. And I was very high on Coach Williams. And I thought, okay, I feel good about that spot. And then you had the disastrous year, Clay's last year, where the play was just horrific. Last year, it wasn't very good. So, yeah, you have a lot of guys. You think we should be able to find 2 guys out of that group, but we haven't found 2 guys out of that group in a little while. I mean, Blackmon was very, very good last year, and the other spot was always a question mark. Maybe not as big a problem as you had it at the strong safety spot and at the nickel spot, but still, it's not like people were afraid to throw outside. So, yeah, maybe the big surprise to me is that Latrell McCutcheon left the program, because you think about it, this is a guy who the coaches knew when they were at Oklahoma. They bring him over to USC. They thought he had the talent to play, and he did play a little bit. And now he looks around the room and says, "I'm not going to get on the field." I assume that's what he did. That's interesting to me. That means McCutcheon looked at this group and thought, it's going to be a hard time. I'm going to have a hard time getting in front of these guys. So maybe that means that he at least feels pretty good about this group going forward. Maybe. I don't know. The big unknown, who is Damani Jackson really? I mean, Damani Jackson was about as elite a corner recruit as you're ever going to find. This kid had length, he had long arms, he has blazing speed, like crazy speed. This is a guy who, as a junior, set the state 100-meter record at 10.25. I don't know if unless you understand track and field, you don't realize just how fast that is. The Olympic qualifying time is 10.16. Damani Jackson wasn't that far from that as a junior in high school. This is a kid with unbelievable talent. He was hurt last year, fine. I thought in the spring we would really hear about him jumping up ahead of everybody else because of how much talent he has. We didn't really hear that. We heard good things, but we heard the same good things that we heard from a lot of other guys. At some point, we're gonna see, who is this guy really? I mean, is this guy somebody who's going to be an NFL lockdown corner in a few years, which is what everybody expected watching him at Modern Day, or is he not? That's the unknown, because if Damani Jackson is, as he becomes healthy, becomes a player everybody thought he was going to be, that's really going to help a lot. It helps if you have a corner who you can stick on the other team's best receiver and take him out of the game. That does wonders for a defense. He hasn't been that yet, but when you're hurt, I don't know that it's easy to become that. Is he ever going to be that guy? I don't know, but that's the biggest unknown from my perspective.
All right. Well, I see the strength is obviously depth, versatility, but more importantly, potential, which is unproven talent, which also can translate to the weakness. What is their potential? How good will they be if there's actually a ferocious pass rush? I don't want to lay it all on the secondary, but you need to really, especially with this group of quarterbacks they're going to face, you really need to help your secondary out. Surprise to me, probably with Christian Roland Wallace. Just is he going to be able to fill? I don't think he's Mekhi Blackman. That's my impression in how I look at him. The unknown would be, how is this group going to handle the Pac-12 quarterbacks and the offenses? And again, I agree with all of you that Damani Jackson is an unknown. If he lives up to his quote potential, that would be a big help. All right, let's complete this first half with the safety room. What do you see with that group, Mark?
So the only strength is the fact that you've got experience coming back. You've got Kalen Bullock, you got Bryson Shaw, you got Jalen Smith, who, he got hurt towards the end of the year, and you also have Max Williams. So those guys are back, second year in the system, and you would hope that that's going to transition to, I'm not talking about turnover production, I'm talking about just being better at your spot when you're in the game. And that kind of leads up to what their weakness was physicality and tackling. So if that weakness last year, which was shown a lot, can improve, that won't be a weakness. To me, it was just the lack of physicality. So the surprise is, I want to put this the right way. The surprise is they're going to this is actually going to be one of the better groups on the defensive side of the ball. And it's because I see what they're doing in the weight room. Kalen Bullock looks like a different dude. Whether it's all natural or not, I don't care, but he should not be called Sticks anymore. He is a completely different looking player. And when you're tasked with having to cover tight ends, you need to be a little bit bigger and stronger than what he was last year. So the unknown is, who's going to be the starter opposite of Kalen? We know he's going to start. He's a all-conference, all-American. Who is the unknown is who's going to be in the rotation. Kalen's going to play a lot. Who are the other safeties going to be? Is Zion Branch going to be ready to step up and put that injury behind him and be that big physical imposing safety inside the box that's been missing for the last couple of years?
All right, Erik.
The strength is Kalen Bullock's coverage ability. And I think for the entire safety group, full stop, that's the one strength that you bring in this year. That guy can cover more field probably than any safety in the country. Greg, you sort of mentioned that interplay between what the defensive line and what the pass rush can do for the secondary. If quarterbacks are having to make early reads and try to throw the ball up, and Kalen can get a jump on stuff because there's a giant defensive lineman who actually beat a guy and is making a quarterback throw off rhythm, Kalen Bullock could pick off 7-8 passes this year. I mean, he has that ability to kind of make quick reads and cover ground. So that is a huge strength for the USC defense to be able to put that back there deep and erase potentially some big plays. The weakness, what we saw all last year, was knocking balls down. 50-50 balls, it seemed like, were like 80-20 balls occasionally, especially to some of those big tight ends. And I don't want to completely dismiss USC's effort against some of those tight ends. The two tight ends that really hurt them, Utah and Notre Dame, those are top 35 picks in the draft, I think. Like, those guys did that against a lot of people. But again, when you're talking about USC position groups, you got to be able to match. You should be a top 35 pick too, right? You should match 1 for 1 all those guys on the other side of the ball. So the weakness is that can you tackle? Can you knock balls down? Can you out physical some of these guys that just ran through you at will in a lot of different games? And then for me, I think surprise and unknown go hand in hand. Zion Branch, what can he do? And Traquan Fagans, the new guy who was coming over from Alabama. There's so much talk about that second transfer portal window additions being the big offensive lineman, the big defensive lineman. But Fagans is a guy who gets added to that secondary. He's a guy that Alabama liked to bring in. And so you don't want to say, oh, just because that happened, he's a good player. But there are enough people that have said, yeah, this guy can play, to think that he can bring you something. Now, he's a young guy. He doesn't bring any experience at this level, but he's got a year in that Alabama system and working there and doing that kind of stuff. And so you think there's some talent and he can give you something there. And USC, I don't know if either of those guys winds up at nickel, but that depth at nickel, when Latrell McCutcheon left, it was Jalen Smith and it was Latrell McCutcheon were the top two guys playing nickel this spring, with Max Williams doing a little bit, but mostly that second safety spot with Bryson Shaw back there. So who's there with Jalen Smith? Who's either pushing him to start or who's the number 2 guy at that spot? And I think that right now maybe is an unknown. Who can do that, and how much do you, going all the way back to where Mark started with the defensive backs, do we see guys kind of move around and shuffle a little bit, and does somebody who you thought would be on the outside move inside and play nickel for you? Because that's a spot where you've got Jalen Smith, who I think, anyone who played nickel for USC last year, I think would admit there were some ups and downs and room to improve this year. So that spot should be one of those on defense. All 11 should be one of these spots on defense that you open up completely, and you got to earn that starting spot. So that's kind of a big spot to watch this fall. I asked Lincoln Riley about kind of what he saw. This is going all the way back to spring, what he saw from that nickel spot last year. And he lumped it in with the inside linebackers and just said, we need to make more plays. Basically we need to be better at those two spots. Though that nickel spot is really important in this defense. You've got to do a lot of different stuff, and it needs to impact the game more than what USC saw last year. So that's, I think, going to be a key spot this fall.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm with Erik. The strength when you're talking about safety is Kalen Bullock. He's an elite coverage guy. He's got a ton of experience now. He's a lot bigger than he used to be. I think he's going to have an incredible year. I really feel good about that spot, and I think Kalen is going to be more of a physical presence too at this point. But I think you start at safety and you look at that spot and you say, okay, we've got one of the top guys in the country there. We feel pretty good about that. The weakness is, this is going to sound unfair. I'll explain it. The weakness is everything around him, because at the other safety spot and at the nickel spot, it was so bad most of the year. And look, it shouldn't be this year. USC has a lot of experience now. I mean, Jalen Smith has played a lot. Max Williams has played a lot. Max Williams has made a lot of plays in his career at USC. Bryson Shaw has played a lot. You've got a lot of guys who have played a lot of football. You have, with Fagans and Zion Branch, you have two guys who were elite recruits who should be able to step up and play well. I mean, you have enough guys that you should be good back there, but they haven't been yet. With my surprise, I'm going to go with Zion Branch. I think Zion Branch is a guy who's about to really make his mark, and probably by the end of the year, lock him into a starting spot. Now, that means that he's going to beat out some guys who have played a ton of football. But Branch is, if he's fully healthy, you're talking about a really big, really athletic kid. I think he has rare skills. And he may be the second best athlete in his family, but he's going to be one of the better athletes on the field. And so I'm going to go with him as a surprise. The unknown, how much is Alex Grinch going to value experience? Like I said, Max Williams and Bryson Shaw have played a ton of football. They've both done things in the past. Max Williams has made a lot of plays at USC, and I know he's been beaten up by USC fans because he's my height, and he had a bunch of 6'6" tight ends that are now first-round draft choices that were catching balls. But that kid's played a lot and played well. Bryson Shaw came in and was the conference defensive player of the week once. I mean, these guys have played a lot. And so you would expect that these guys can play. The question I think everybody has is, but are they elite players? Is Max Williams an elite player? Is Bryson Shaw an elite player? I don't know that. I know they played a lot. I know that they should be reliable at this point in their careers. But are those guys good enough that they're going to be able to hold off Zion Branch or a Traquan Fagans, guys that are probably physically better? I don't know. I think that's the big unknown. But the other thing I would say too, this is important because there's been a lot of talk about guys getting bigger in the secondary, and Lincoln Riley's mentioned that. And I think that's important, but understand, tackling problems aren't always because you're not big. There are a lot of really good tacklers that aren't very big. The Honey Badger from LSU a few years ago turned out to be a heck of an NFL player. That guy can tackle. He's tiny. He can tackle. Because it's not just how big you are, especially in the secondary. In the secondary, you're not filling holes. You don't have to be able to thump a guy and drive him backwards. In the secondary, you have to be able to get guys down. And that means, as much as anything, you have to find yourself in the right position. Because if you're a step slow and you're trying to arm tackle somebody, especially with a physical running back or the big receivers you see these days, you're not going to bring those guys down. And so sometimes tackling is about being big and physical. Sometimes tackling, especially in the secondary, is you're a step late getting where you need to be. And if you're a step late getting where you need to be in the secondary, you're not going to be a good tackler. You can be a great tackler as a safety and never do what Ronnie Lott used to do to people. I mean, these days, that's probably going to get you thrown out of a game anyway. But you can't afford to be a guy who reads the play a little bit slowly and is not there in time, and you're reaching out and you don't get a shoulder on the guy, you get a forearm on the guy and he runs through it and goes 70 yards. You can't do that. And USC has done a lot of that over the last couple of years. So I would expect the tackling to improve in the secondary if you have 4 or 5 guys in the secondary who get to the right spot quickly and aren't playing slowly. I don't mean foot speed. I mean you're slow in getting where you need to get, because that's the biggest problem with tackling in the secondary, I think. So experience should help with that, I would hope, but we'll see. I don't know. I mean, look, the secondary has been such a disaster for the last couple of years. It's just so, I mean, you can't watch that. You can't watch that Cotton Bowl game and feel anything other than terror when you think about what USC has done in the secondary lately. So, I mean, they've got to get a whole lot better, and they have athletes. They should be able to, but it's prove it time, and those guys have to be substantially better than they were last year.
Well, I'll say the strength is experience, numbers, Caleb Bullock, weakness, tackling. We have to see that they can tackle. And of course, covering tight ends. I don't know how they're going to do it, but there's still a big group of tight ends that are really good that they're going to face in the future. I think the surprise will be Zion Branch. I think he's ready to go, and he could be a real difference maker. The unknown to me is the starting safety opposite Bullock. Bryson Shaw, is he the guy? Where does Max Williams fit in? The nickel position in general, how is that going to work out? But perhaps we'll get some answers, at least in the first half of the schedule. And, the 6, I hate to term them exhibition games, but we'll see. All right, let's head to halftime. Excuse me. Panel, when training camp opens early Friday morning, whether you're attending practice or not, what do you want to know from the get-go and why, Chris?
Well, what I really care about, we probably won't be able to know from the get-go because we won't know until the pads get on a few days later. But the most important question surrounding this football team is how physical is that front seven going to be? You got a lot more size and talent there than you had last year. But the truth is that group on the whole last year got pushed around and beaten up and really embarrassed outside of Thule. There were some exceptions. Look, I know that there were other guys that made plays, but for the most part, opposing offenses had nothing to worry about. As long as Thule doesn't make a play, the quarterback's going to have all the time in the world to throw, and at least half the time, there's going to be a gigantic hole for the running back. The big question about this team is that front seven going to bring it at people? Are they going to look like USC is a top 10 program in the front seven? Because if they do, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to beat USC. And I mean anybody. I'm including Georgia, because Georgia doesn't have Caleb Williams and they don't have Lincoln Riley running the offense. You're going to have to score points to beat USC. And if USC's front seven is aggressive and physical, if they're getting off blocks and making plays, they're going to be a hard out for Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State or anybody else. But man, those guys, they have to get so much better up front. That's the question, right? We know what the offense is going to do. The offense is going to run up and down the field all day long against almost everybody. We know that. The question is whether they have to score 48 to win or whether the offense is going to be able to take the fourth period off. And that comes down to what that front seven is going to look like. So that's what I want to know.
Mark?
I want to know who the homegrown leaders are going to be. It seems like everybody who steps up to be the vocal, I'm going to kick your ass type of leader has been a transfer. Last year was Travis Dye. Eric Gentry showed a little bit of that when he, pogoed out onto the field, trying to get the defense fired up. Caleb Williams, I think, speaks for itself. At Pac-12 Media Day, I asked Lincoln Riley, is Mason Cobb, that type of guy similar to Travis Dye, who's going to tell somebody, they suck if they're not doing their job. And he said, yeah, he's the guy. So who are the guys that USC has spotted and recruited who's been around for 2 or 3 years that's willing to step up and take over that role? It shouldn't have to come from somebody else. So, Chris talked about, are they going to, is the front seven going to be big and nasty and play defense like USC fans and what USC's played defense throughout her history? I think that comes hand in hand. Who's going to step up and just not stand for, looking like a weak team on defense? Who are the leaders? I want to find out who's going to step up when Caleb Williams isn't on the field or Mason Cobb isn't on the field. They're going to be on the field a lot, but when they're not, who are the other guys?
Erik?
kind of along the same lines as Chris on that. I just want to see, again, if we're talking just when we first show up and guys are going through kind of motions and lining up, what those first 5 offensive linemen look like and what that front 6 that USC uses, who those first guys are that go out there and how that group is lining up. I don't think that's going to be an absolute slam dunk. Here are your definitive starters and this is the way things are going to go all season. But I think it gives you a sense of who did the work over the offseason, who do the coaches kind of feel best about to open things with, and what that sort of, starting lineup for the first day looks like.
And I'll conclude this question with, for me, I wanted to see who the leadership aside from Caleb is, and aside from maybe Cobb, who's going to step up in the locker room, who's going to step up during tense moments in games, critically important. All right, panel, on the first day of training camp on Friday, you're there in person, or maybe you're not, but who would be the first person or coach you want to talk to, interview, and why, Chris?
Interview, I don't care. If you're talking about a private conversation where they know that I'm not going to repeat what they say and they're being open with me, there are two things there are 2 people I want to talk to. I want to ask Lincoln Riley, why did you stick with Alex Grinch? And why do you believe this is the guy who can give you an elite defense to go with your elite offense? I just want to know. I don't doubt that Lincoln Riley believes in Alex Grinch, and I don't doubt that Lincoln Riley knows a whole lot more about football than I do. But I'd like to know why. I mean, there must be some logic there, and I'd like to understand it. The second one is, and you won't know this on day 1. You won't know this until probably a week or 2 into camp. I'd like to sit down with Bear Alexander and say, okay, you spent a year at Georgia. You've now spent a couple of weeks in training camp with USC. I don't want you to tell me about the offense. I know about the offense. You've seen your teammates now. Compare this to what you had at Georgia. Does this group look like an elite group to you, or does it not? And I'd love to get his honest take on that, because while I don't think USC is going to have or needs to have a Georgia level defense, I'd kind of like to know whether Bear Alexander looks at the group and says, you know what, there's some ballers here. I think we're going to be all right. Or whether he says, I'm going to make some plays. I think Sticks will make some plays. I think Cobb will make some plays. Yeah, we'll see about the other guys. I'd like to know.
All right. Mark?
Erik actually talked about this earlier in the show. Probably Roy Manning. I'd like to know if he feels as much pressure as everybody puts on Alex Grinch. I mean, obviously Grinch is the defensive coordinator, but we're talking about the position coach of the group that's done nothing. And I'd like to find out, how does Coach Manning deal with that? How does he plan on dealing with it this season?
All right, Erik?
Well, I'm eavesdropping on Chris's conversations with those guys, so I don't know if I can get my own thing. But again, if it's fully getting the truth and dropping coach speak and all of that, same sort of idea with Sean Nua about that defensive line group, right? His time at Michigan and with some of those other programs that he's worked with, what do they have here? What does USC have right now that they're going to take into the season for this year, and how does that measure up with some of the better ones? Because when you could throw out talking to Justin Dietich, right, about what does the interior of that defensive line look like going against those guys and the new faces and all of that, but he hasn't played against Georgia, right? He hasn't been on programs that have had those defensive lines. So I think Sean Nua, and again, you're not going to get him probably to really, really, really give you the truth if it's not, right? I mean, if he comes out and it's truthful that, yeah, this is that kind of defensive line, then I think you feel really good about it, because he's seen some talented ones.
Yeah, and I'm going to go along with Sean Nua too. I'd like to hear what he has to say about the younger players, that he brought in? What stood out to him about these players? And for those that were in the spring, what did he like? I don't suspect he's going to tell you any weaknesses. I wouldn't. But I would also be interested just in his positive takes. All right, panel, the Pac-12 had its media day in Las Vegas on Friday. Whether you were in Las Vegas or watching on the Pac-12 networks, what were your overall impressions of the atmosphere and presentation and the treatment of the Trojans in their last Pac-12 media day before moving on to the Big Ten in 2024? Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think it was a missed opportunity for the Pac-12. I think they should have had had the media day at one of those really old casinos on Fremont Street, the ones that have the really low ceilings and they're really smoky and everybody there is like 85 years old, right? The places that used to be important and people used to care about and they used to be hip and now they're not and nobody at all cares about them. That's where it should have been, because that's what the conference is. Nobody cares about the conference. It used to be something. And the program that made it something in the past is now going to go away. So I think they missed a marketing opportunity. I think they could have told the whole world, this is who we are. We're the Pac-12, the former Conference of Champions, formerly the conference that mattered, on our way to being one of the old, smoky, gross casinos on Fremont Street. So. And that's all I have to say about Pac-12 Media Day. I'm just glad I never have to pay attention to another Pac-12 Media Day in my life.
Mark?
Yeah,
you were there.
Yeah, I put out my notes and observations of the whole event. First, look, you walk in and they're using a nightclub and it literally has the feel and the vibe of a strip club. So, I mean, it didn't have enough places for everybody to sit down. It was standing room only in the back. The Wi-Fi didn't work. This was your typical Pac-12 production. So thankfully, it is USC's last Pac-12 football media day. And hopefully the Big Ten Conference, well, obviously, first of all, they have multiple days, and I'm sure they're going to put a little bit more into it. Look, the commissioner couldn't even use, and I could be, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe George Kliavkoff mentioned USC or UCLA by name one time. He talked about they're returning the Heisman Award winner to the conference for the first time since 2005, which, obviously USC is the only school that's going to do that. So everything he said felt very disingenuous. It was almost like he didn't want to be there, and I understand that. I mean, he didn't have a new media rights deal to talk about. And once you had USC and Utah off the stage, I was just waiting for, my airplane ride to arrive. There wasn't a lot going on. There wasn't a lot of energy in the building. Erik, you were there. Do you disagree?
Well, I mean, I guess I haven't spent as much time in strip clubs as Mark. I can't make that comparison quite as easily. But it did strike me as like the Pac-12 trying to sort of find this like hip place to hold it. And you had, you talked about kind of Wi-Fi issues where the players were, where you had these sort of booth seating arrangements where there wasn't going to be enough room because 8 people weren't going to share a booth. And then you go upstairs to kind of the workroom and there's no outlets, right, to plug your stuff in to work. So it did strike me a little bit as trying to find this like cool hip thing. And it wasn't just about football. Now, I haven't been to SEC media days or Big Ten media days, so I'm not going to say that those don't do that and that they're all football, but that's kind of how this felt. And it's just, I mean, a lot of the stuff that Chris talked about, it's super frustrating. Like, I don't want USC to leave the Pac-12. I want the Pac-12 to go back 10, 15 years, figure their stuff out, and be as strong as the conference is this year. Like this is set up to be a really good, really strong, really entertaining conference race. And it should be in a conference that is one of the top 2 conferences in the country with this like tremendous future out in front of it. And so again, that ship has sailed and we are beyond all of that. And that's kind of what this media day sort of felt like, where there was this, I mean, there was a lot of talk about, hey, USC, UCLA is your last one, moving on. And I know that the members who are still there, the commissioner too, they didn't want to spend any time talking about any of that sort of stuff. But that's one of your big issues. The other big issue being the media rights deal, and you had to come out early and say we have nothing about that, right? Like the two things that you guys want to talk about, and Deion Sanders probably being the third, and you know, that's clearly an unfortunate circumstance and not his fault for not being there, and you wish him the best. But again, the three major storylines are things that the conference didn't really want to talk about or have be a major storyline for that event. And that just seems like, you know, what has happened to the Pac-12 the last few years, just stepping in it whenever they tried to do anything at all that would benefit them. So I think that the people involved in it who tried to carry it out, like there was probably a lot of interesting conversation about some of the other programs. USC going so early made it so that we and a lot of people there are covering USC, and so that shifted to now talking to the players and coaches and moving on there. So it took some of the attention away, I think, from that main stage as you were going through. But I think they did probably a good job for the players and the coaches that were there. We got to watch Caleb Williams play pickleball and learn that guy does not like to lose at anything. As much kind of intensity playing pickleball as I think there is playing football for him, and he plays pickleball quite a bit. So there's some talent there too. If football somehow doesn't work out, or he needs to be a professional athlete until he's about 75, he's got an outlet there too. So yeah, overall, I mean, you know, for us, it's a good chance to talk to some of the players and talk to Lincoln Riley ahead of fall camp. And I think the USC guys did a good job representing the school.
I will just say I watched it on television. I was pleased with the television end of it. It was like a traditional press conference. I think the last that I've been to, and then I stopped going, was the fiasco of coaches are talking, and then another group is interviewing on the other side of the podium. It just was nuts. This seemed like, okay, we'll interview the coach, bring on the players. I don't know, the setting, at least it looked like something out of the Bada Bing Gentlemen's Club from The Sopranos to me. But I think the point got across. My thought was, in the end, was if you're not going to mention SC at all, which was, I thought you really had to work hard at not mentioning them, not even mentioning Caleb Williams as the Heisman Trophy winner, but just mentioning Heisman Trophy. What is it going to be like if SC actually wins the Pac-12 title in Las Vegas? Is Kliavkoff going to say, I would like to congratulate this team for winning the Pac-12 championship and welcome this team into the playoffs? It's going to be a very interesting situation. I want to end this halftime and then really get moving here. On the recruiting front, do you have any final thoughts regarding local Bellflower St. John Bosco 4-star linebacker Kingston Bialamu Asa committing to Notre Dame over USC and Ohio State? Was there any sense that it was a surprise to you, or did you say, okay, better Notre Dame than Ohio State in the same conference? Chris?
Well, I don't know how going to Notre Dame can be better for us than being this. We still have to play them every year. So here's the thing that jumped out at me, that this quote, I assume a lot of the people watching saw the quote, but I'm going to read it to you. He said, honestly, man, I couldn't see myself there, talking about Notre Dame, but I could at the other two schools. But I read Hebrews 11:1, which talks about faith as assurance in the things we can't see. Going to the mountains really solidified my answer because I felt God wanted me to have faith, which required trusting in what I could not see. So a couple things on that. One is that, look, in the Bible, God often asks people to do things that are very difficult and not all that pleasant, right? I mean, Moses had to go stand up to Pharaoh, and Jonah had to go to Nineveh, where all the people were really mean and the girls were ugly, which is, pretty similar to what this kid's being asked to do. But but no, here's the thing. USC fans are upset. I think they expected to lose Tatum. I think they expected to lose Matthews, the wide receiver from Georgia. Neither one of those surprised anybody. I think this one hurts a little bit. It's a position of need. It's a local kid. And I'll just say this. Look, I'm going to take him at his word. There was something about Notre Dame that was different than USC and Ohio State. And you know what? There is something about Notre Dame that's different than those other two. And if that meant something to him, he thought there was some sort of spiritual component to it. This is a kid who goes to a Catholic high school. Then great. I'm sorry to lose him, but look, here's the thing. Recruiting has changed now. USC is going to lose out on some kids just because some kids want the bag of money the USC is not offering to high school kids. I don't have any reason to believe that this is that case. And if this is simply a case where he says that there are reasons having to do with my faith that I think I should be at Notre Dame, okay. I'm not going to wish him best, right? I mean, everybody always says that. Well, I wish a kid well. I don't wish him well. I don't wish him bad. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. But it's not like I want him to have a great career at Notre Dame. I don't want anybody at Notre Dame to have a great career. But if that's what he feels is important and that's why he made his decision, then at least he's making his decision based on things that I think are responsible and mature and legitimate. So, okay. Sorry, we're not going to get him.
Mark, any
Yeah.
final thoughts on this?
No, I think Chris covered it. It's obvious that faith is very important to Kingston and to his family. That quote also was raises your eyebrow. You're obviously willing to go somewhere that you don't feel it. If you don't feel something, but you're willing to close your eyes and put all of your faith into spiritual guidance, you have to accept that. Now, I think some of that probably is what he's saying is, look, Los Angeles and Columbus have a lot of vices. You're not going to find a lot of things interrupting your time in South Bend, Indiana. It's pretty much Notre Dame is out there. So maybe that's where he's going with that quote is he knows where he wants to eventually go. That journey is to get to the NFL. He can do that in Notre Dame. And if religion helps him get there, great. I kind of mentioned last week, I mentioned that might have been the compromise, that if he doesn't go to USC, he would go to Notre Dame because he's got a girlfriend who goes to LMU, and maybe that eases some of her concern if he's not in Columbus, Ohio. Just saying.
Erik?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you recruit against that when he's like, these schools did a better job recruiting me, I guess, but I'm not going to go there. All I know is that he better never, ever bite on play action ever in his career, because he's already said he doesn't trust anything that he sees. So there's no way that he should ever be caught following his eyes or anything like that. So we'll see. Again, that's a guy where at the beginning of this recruiting class, you needed him, right? If you're USC, he's one of those 3-4 must-get guys when you're listing that out. And USC, from everything we've heard, did a great job recruiting him and put themselves in that conversation after it didn't seem like they might be in that conversation early on in his recruiting process. And it's been a struggle for USC to get any player from St. John Bosco over the last few years, especially the elite guys. So I don't see this as, oh, Alex Grinch and Lincoln Riley completely fumbled this. But at the end of the day, when it's a zero-sum game of you got him or you didn't get him, and in this case where if you don't get him, then your rival gets better, it's definitely a hit to this class.
Well, I'll just say this. I'm a lot happier he's going to Notre Dame than Ohio State. I don't want to see a player this caliber go and compete within the conference and represent the state of Ohio as opposed to representing the region of Southern California. I understand the religious aspect of it. It isn't the first time that SC's lost players from the LA area to Notre Dame. It's been going on forever and a day. I wish him a great career, except when he plays against USC. But all in all, you know what? That's the way it goes. And it's hard to recruit against Notre Dame when religion gets tossed into it. So be it. Let it go.
Make sure that
we're
first date. Make sure that first date is in person.
Yeah, right. Before we swiftly go through the second half, friends, before we head into that second half, a reminder: WeAreSC encourages you watching on Inside the Trojans Huddle on sites like YouTube to click the like and red subscriber buttons. Greatly valued, appreciated. It's free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites, and be sure to check out WeAreSC.com. And we highly encourage you to become a subscriber. Let's go into the second half here, and I'm going to edit a little bit of what we're going to do, panel, just ahead of time in the interest of time. But I did want to hit on a couple of questions here. Last week, the official Pac-12 conference media poll was released. And for those that did not see or hear about the poll, here's the predicted order of finish. USC 1, Washington 2, Utah 3, Oregon 4, Oregon State 5, UCLA 6, Washington State 7, Arizona 8, Cal 9, 10 was ASU, 11 was Colorado, 12 was Stanford. Panel, your thoughts on the media poll? What jumped out at you? What did you find? Any surprises? Erik?
No, nothing really jumped out. I did a poll and it was pretty close to what that was. I think that USC being 1, Washington, Utah, and Oregon all got first place votes, but USC, it was kind of landslide in terms of the number of first place votes that they got. So that was clearly, not a full consensus, but a majority of the people thought USC should be number 1. Washington, Utah, Oregon, I probably wouldn't have had a problem if they were in any order 2 through 4. I think that's something where you can make arguments that Oregon's too low or Washington's too high or whatever that is, that group's there. And then, yeah, I think the rest of it was pretty close. I think Oregon State, again, in any other year where you don't have those 4, I think people really like what Oregon State has coming back, and that 5 is a lot closer to that, I think, 2-3 range than it is to like the 7-8-9 range.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, Oregon State at 5 jumped out at me a little bit. I think UCLA is going to be pretty good this year. They probably won't play great defense. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think they're going to be a challenge, and I'm not convinced that Oregon State's going to be better. But the thing that really jumps out about it, and I think it's right, but Stanford at 12. I mean, this was one of the elite programs in the conference for much of the last 15 years. And Stanford, while people talk about Stanford's difficulty recruiting because of their academic standards, the reality is that Stanford's academics also give them a huge advantage over most of the teams on this list, because any player that's a good student, Stanford's tough to beat for that. And none of the, ASU and Cal, Arizona, Washington State, none of those programs have an advantage like that when it comes to recruiting. Stanford should never be 12th in the conference. So it's just striking to see them down that low, even though I think they belong there.
All right, Mark?
Yeah, I have no issue with the preseason poll. USC obviously was the overwhelming favorite. I think where I might have flip-flopped the Oregon schools, and I'm using it from the fact that Oregon State's offensive line, every one of them was either preseason first team or second team. So why are they so low on the team overall, sliding them behind Oregon? And the other thing I want to know is who actually gave Oregon their 1 first place vote. So that I found that curious, because you have USC, Washington, Utah, and obviously Oregon, those four return the quarterbacks. But, Utah, they're the back-to-back conference champion. And it seems like they're the ones getting the least amount of respect here. As far as everybody else after those first four, it really doesn't matter.
All right. I thought that USC, not surprisingly, was one. I was a little interested on and I wasn't surprised Washington was number 2. And thank God the Trojans are playing Washington at home. I always kind of like to look at the bottom 3 or 4 teams. Colorado, Stanford, ASU, Cal. It really kind of says what people think is the USC schedule in a nutshell. If you look at 1 through 6 and then 7 through 12, and of course SC's not playing Oregon State or Washington State, so it's interesting. Panel, I'm going to I know you've got the script in front of you. I'm going to skip down to a question, which was question number 3, which I think is a short answer. If given the opportunity after this season, what teams remaining in the Pac-12 or teams you would like to see the Trojans continue to play in non-conference games? Erik, what of the Pac-12's remaining teams that are going to go into the 2024 into the future, is there a team or teams you'd like to see in the non-conference continue to have games with?
Not really. I mean, maybe the Weekender, right? To keep that going and just play either Cal or Stanford every other year to give people an easy trip. But are there tons of memories of playing Arizona or Arizona State that can't be replaced by going and playing some Big Ten schools? Probably not. I mean, it'll be a different answer for everybody. I'm sure a lot of people, USC fans, have family in Arizona, and that trip is great for them, to be able to do that. But that might be the one I would keep. And honestly, I wouldn't really even push that hard for it. I think that we saw kind of when the Big Ten opponents came out, the schedule started getting talked about, kind of how much interest there was in there, and then I think a lot of people are ready to go to that conference.
Chris, who would you like to see them continue with, or do you?
I mean, I think Stanford and Cal are teams that we should still play occasionally. I wouldn't mind seeing Washington on the schedule from time to time. A lot of great history between USC and Washington. I would never play Oregon again, and I don't really care about any of the other programs other than the 3 I mentioned. But I'd probably play those 3 occasionally.
Mark?
Yeah, the correct answer is the Bay Area schools. Look, USC is going to play Notre Dame every single year, so you can rotate Stanford or Cal every other year to keep that tradition alive, as well as what Erik brought up, an easy road trip for the fans. And then, I wouldn't be opposed to the Arizona schools. You can rotate them in as well. I've talked about this in the past. It's a great way to keep USC on the West Coast and reduce travel. So you keep the Bay Area schools, you got the tradition of the Weekender, and then you've got Notre Dame. Every other year, you've got Arizona State. And if they're not available, you pluck a San Jose State, a San Diego State, because USC is going to go Notre Dame. They're going to look for another marquee matchup. You've got the LSU, that type of game coming up. And I think they should maintain that, because the playoff committee, once you're going to 12 teams, I don't think having 1 or 2 losses on your record is going to hurt you, especially if you're lining up against elite competition. So let's make the Pac-12 the easy non-conference game. Cal, Stanford, Arizona State.
And I agree with Mark. What I would like to see is every other year. One year they play at Stanford, the next year they play at Cal. I think SC needs a Northern California presence. I don't think we want them to be forgotten. I mean, if you talk about reigning in the state recruiting wise, I think it's good to have a presence up there. The fans love it. I would like it personally. And again, that third non-conference game, obviously Notre Dame's one of them. But I would like to see, the weekender continued, because I just think it's just a good thing all around. And I think Stanford and Cal would like it. I don't trust that the Arizona schools will remain in the Pac-12, but it could happen. All right. Heading into overtime, we have a lot of questions. I'm going to limit them. We have about 8 questions now, out of respect for time. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions here. If you don't hear your question said, we will table it till next week. I promise you. We've done that in the past. I think my word is my bond here. So we're going to go with this question. This is from Steve O, USC. What exactly is Cliff Kingsbury doing at SC? Is he advising, strategizing, or just analyzing? What is he doing, guys?
Yes, he's doing all of those things.
Okay.
I mean,
he's
Lincoln
hanging
Riley
around
said
for
it.
the long term, which is
He
nice.
said it. What Lincoln Riley said at Media Day, that they've got a mind like that in the offensive room. They're going to use it in every way that they can. And that's looking at opposing defenses, looking at their own offense, coming up with schemes or plays or anything like that. I mean, he can't go out on the field and coach players, but off the field and in meetings and any of that kind of stuff, he can be as involved as he wants to be. And Lincoln Riley was, yes, yeah, very much. We want as much as we can get out of him. There's no reason to bring a guy like that in and then hamstring him and say, no, we don't want any of your thoughts about any of this stuff. And Lincoln Riley said, it's great for me as a head coach to bounce ideas off of him. Like, he's been a head coach at the college level and at the NFL level. That's help that Lincoln Riley can get in terms of someone who's been in that chair and had to make decisions that Lincoln Riley has to make. So yeah, he's going to do all of that stuff and could be pretty integral, I think, to the coaches who are on the field, having that sounding board off the field from a guy who can take sort of a 30,000 foot view of the program.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions here, and then we're going to wrap it up. This is from USC Rick from Tampa, Florida. Is Pat Chung from Washington State the perceived leader in the clubhouse as the next AD, given his past ties to the Big Ten, his reputation as a strong fundraiser? His credentials seem quite impressive. Any comments on Pat Chung here?
Sounds like a perfect candidate. Why not?
I mean, I mentioned him last year as one of my, or last week as one of my 2. Now I don't actually do the hiring for USC. Surprised there, I know, but so I can't say if he's the leading candidate or anything like that. But I certainly have not heard anything about Pat Chung that makes me think, no, he's not a fit and he can't do the job.
Okay, so we'll end it up with this. This is from Bogey Class of 1973. This is always a controversial question. Are any of you hearing anything about restoring USC's football uniforms to the classic, unsurpassed version that the team wore from 2002 through 2005? In 2006, the color of the pants changed from a luminous gold to a hideous yellow. Also, since Greg and I are the same age, I'm sorry to hear that, but at least we're still here. I think he will agree that the shade of Cardinal has changed over the years from a deeper, darker red to lighter and brighter shade of red. I hate to say it, but Stanford's Cardinal color far surpasses SC's. The red banding on the sleeves and collar of the white away jerseys also has got to go. If nothing else, just get our colors right. What say you guys? Thanks for all you do. I will just dabble on this. I don't want to see alternative uniforms. I don't want to see city uniforms. I want to see traditional Cardinal and gold uniforms. That's how I feel about it. How do the rest of you feel about uniforms in general?
Now, did you say city uniforms on that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. As long as they don't wear the Ronald McDonald shoes and the metallic helmets with the silver chrome face masks, I know people get up in arms about this shade of red and Cardinal and this shade of yellow or gold. That's going to happen, I think, over the years as you kind of move forward. I'm not as bothered by those 2 colors, but those shoes and those helmets, man, that was an abomination watching them play in those.
Yeah, they got to go.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that. I hadn't noticed the color of the pants change. You know, I do think the red seems to be a lighter red than it used to be. I don't think it's the same Cardinal, and I like the old one better. I agree with everything Erik said, although I'll say I was surprised that I didn't like the helmets, the metallic helmets, because actually I think OU's helmets look fantastic, and that's sort of the look they have, but it didn't look right for USC. So, but I didn't know that there was a difference in the pant color.
All right. Well, listen, first I want to just say to the people that did send in some stuff that we didn't get to, and I'm talking about Scott in Gilbert, Arizona, from Troy 70, from Trojan from the Valley, and from, I love this one, I hate ND in St. Paul. This is the way he phonetically spells it, Minnesota. We're going to get to you. You're the top 4 questions to begin. In fact, some of the answers we can give will be based on what happens with opening day of practice. So again, if you have a question or comments for our panel, go to the WeAreSC members message board, click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle viewer or listener questions. Final reminder, if you enjoyed Inside the Trojans Huddle, please click on the like and red subscriber buttons. We greatly appreciate your support. Be sure to check out WeAreSC.com and become a subscriber. That'll do it for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. Till next Tuesday, a big thank you to our panelists. They were great. Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, Chris Arledge, and a special thank you to all of you for watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. We're opening training camp. Till next Tuesday, this is your moderator, Greg Katz, reminding you all to fight on, everybody.